Welcome to Speaking of Jazz with Manny Kellogg, and in association with JazzTribe.news. Now let's get started.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to jazz lovers wherever you might be. And I want to thank you again for joining us here on this fantastic show, Speaking of Jazz. And I'm your host, Manny Kellogg. I am so delighted, I'm honored, I'm nervous to have a fantastic person on the show today. She is a bassist. She plays all of the strings. She's a writer. She's an arranger. She's an educator. She's sought after all up and down the East Coast. She's a band leader. She has her own trio called 3D Jazz Trio. And I can go on and on and on, but I will be taking up a lot of her time. And I just want to dive into it. Please join me in welcoming my good friend from the East Coast, from the East Coast to the West Coast to all over the United States. Please welcome Miss Amy Shook. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. Can you hear me?
I hear you fantastic.
Okay,
I see you waving too.
Okay, good. Excellent. I'm doing well, Manny. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I told you earlier I'm nervous. I'm very nervous.
I don't see why.
If I bite my tongue, forgive me.
Don't do that. No, we can have fun.
You know, I have heard so much about you. I've seen you play, and it's just, you're so exciting to watch on stage. And I really want to get into the meat and greet of Miss Amy Shook. So I'd like to start by you telling us where are you from, Amy, and what were some of your influences to get you started? Go ahead.
Well, originally I'm from Idaho, which is not the East Coast. It's the Pacific Northwest. It's one of the vowel states, I always say. It gets confused with Iowa and Ohio, but it's even further west. And I grew up there and I went to school there, and I ended up going to the University of Idaho. And at the University of Idaho, there is a fantastic jazz festival that has been happening for decades now called the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival. And of course, the School of Music is named for him, the Lionel Hampton School of Music. So I went to the University of Idaho on a violin scholarship, actually, and I did my matriculation in classical violin, and I think I got a bachelor's in composition also. But I really went there because of the jazz festival. Being from Idaho, there wasn't a whole lot happening on that front locally where I could go see it, except for when I was in high school. The fantastic pianist Gene Harris ended up relocating and living in Boise. And so I did get to see him live a number of times. And of course, because of that, one of the bass players that he was playing with all the time was Ray Brown. So my first major and probably still my strongest influence in terms of bass playing is going to be Ray Brown. And I remember the first time I heard him, I was in junior high, and I hadn't started playing bass at that point. I was still playing violin, and I had gone to the jazz festival in my jazz choir. You know, we went to the jazz festival because they had a big part of that festival is a very strong educational component, and so they have jazz choir day and they have jazz band day, you know, all levels from elementary all the way up to college. And so we were there with my choir, and every evening we would attend the evening performances by all these incredible jazz greats. And, I was 13 or whatever. I didn't have any idea what I was hearing, who I was hearing. I just knew that it really resonated with me, and I was I was gobsmacked, I mean, I saw Carmen McRae, I saw Dizzy Gillespie. I saw, of course, Lionel Hampton and his big band. And, you know, I mean, I should get out the programs to see all of the folks that I've seen over the years, as well as got to meet or play with over the years. But one of the linchpin performances was the Ray Brown trio at that festival. And it was Gene Harris, Ray Brown, and Jeff Hamilton. And I don't know, I think they had not yet recorded the album called Summer Wind, which is Summer Wind Live at the Low Oz, the whole album. And that's, you know, in my top 10 Desert Island albums. But I remember hearing that trio and Ray Brown doing this tune called The Real Blues. And so for anyone who hasn't heard that, you got to go check it out. Just look up Ray Brown, The Real Blues.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had no idea what was happening. I just, you know, I knew I wanted that, you know, whatever that was. I wanted that. I wanted to do that. And so the next year in the jazz choir, there was always a combo that accompanied the choir. And the guy who had been playing bass ended up going to high school. So, you know, there was a vacancy in the combo. And the choir teacher asked for a volunteer to play bass in the combo, and I was like, oh, pick me, you know. So that was kind of the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning, I don't know. Anyway, but I started playing bass. I'm self-taught on bass, which is still, it's an interesting concept, just because, you know, you think about, oh, well, you're limited by not having a direct instructor. But in all fairness, I had been studying violin, and I was taking violin lessons and doing that. So I feel like my technique that I gathered, you know, playing that instrument, I had to modify it to make sure I could play the bass. But then, you know, I just listened to records and cassettes. Who even knows? You know, records and cassettes. You know, I guess cassettes are kind of making a comeback, and I know vinyl is, but
I remember the cassettes.
Yeah, cassettes. So, yeah, you know, I would just listen and try to imitate what I was hearing. And then, of course, whenever I was able to see them live, someone like Ray Brown, for example, or, you know, I'm just so many great bass players that I saw at that festival. John Clayton, you know, certainly Christian McBride at some point, Dave Holland, Ron Carter. I mean, so many fantastic bass players. I would just look at their technique to see what were they doing. And then, of course, I ended up getting some methodology books. One of the greatest ones still, I think, for pedagogy, especially for a jazz bassist, is the Evolving Bassist by Rufus Reed. For anyone who's looking for a good book to start, if you're trying to learn to play the bass, that's a good place to start. But, you know, just trying to copy what I was hearing,
Yeah.
you know, and learn that way. And, you know, ultimately, I think that was the best tack, you know. And I say that lovingly and with honor to all my respective teachers that I had on violin, but there was always something I felt like I was having to do it according to whatever method book or whatever this teacher was saying I had to do. And I felt like in my technique on violin, like I had, it was almost like a crutch. I was bound to do things a specific way, if that makes any kind of sense. Whereas with bass, I was like, well, I got to figure it out. How am I going to get from point A to point B on the fingerboard? I don't know what position this is, you know. And later on, of course, I did study that and then discover all of those things to make my technique, you know, better. Still working on that. We'll always be working on that. I guess that's another wonderful thing about music and playing the bass. It's a very physical instrument, and I'm never going to master it. Keeping my interest. So, yeah. So that's to sum up. That's it. Yeah.
Now you mentioned that you mentioned Ray Brown,
Mm-hmm.
the man with the gigantic sound.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get a chance to study with him or just meet him?
I just met him. I did not get a chance to study with him, and to be honest, I would have been terrified. You know, I mean, absolutely terrified, because, you know, I didn't know anything then. I feel like I still don't know anything now, but I really didn't know anything then. Really, really. So it was kind of like I studied with him via all of his recordings, and and I'm still studying with him via that. And now with the amazing resource of YouTube, all of these videos. I mean, I think about, man, what if I had had access to that when I was coming up? I mean, I probably would have got nothing done, other than, well, that's not true. I would have got a lot done, but it would have been like, man, that resource is amazing. And, and new things keep surfacing, which is really exciting too.
Right, right. Well, this next question is not really too difficult. Who are the artists that you've worked with and are working with at this time?
Wow. I've had the pleasure of working with so many fantastic artists.
I bet you have.
And I'm like, of course, now that you put me on the spot, I'm like, what's my name? But yeah, I mean, just this past weekend at Blues Alley, I was working with this fantastic singer named Nicole Henry, and it was just like we tore the roof off. It was such a great show, and before that, I mean, certainly I've had the privilege to play with so many great musicians, both as as a sideman and then like part of a touring component. And I'm thinking specifically of playing with the incomparable Maurice Hines.
Okay.
Jr., And for those who don't know who he is, his brother Gregory Hines was kind of more famous in the movie scene, but both Maurice and Gregory grew up tap dancing and singing together with their dad. They had a show called Hines and Dad, and they performed with Ella Fitzgerald and Judy Garland and Sammy Davis Jr. I mean, you name it, any of that star-studded, era of like truly incredible entertainers. They were part of that scene. And Maurice had started doing a show called Tappin Thru Life, which was a tribute, and kind of like a nostalgia, but tribute to his brother and his dad and his family and his career. And it was accompanied by a smaller version of the Diva Jazz Orchestra, which is run by one of my best friends and also another band member, Sherrie Maricle. So if you are familiar with the Diva Jazz Orchestra, it's an all-women big band that's been out of New York, for 30 years or something like that. Originally started by Stanley Kay, who was manager and friend with Buddy Rich. And so it was like, he was like, well, he met Sherrie and was like, well, are there any other women that play as well as you? And she's like,
right,
of course
right.
there are. Of course there are, but it's just, it was an era of like, okay, well, now's the time for women to be seen, and to be heard and to be received, I guess is maybe a good way to put it. Anyway, so she had been Maurice's musical director, and for his show, he had a 9-piece version of that big band. And when we started doing regional theater tours in, DC to Atlanta to Cleveland, out to LA, and then eventually culminating up in New York, and just that experience. I mean, there's great entertainers now, but
yes,
there's something about that generation, Maurice's generation, the Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., that there's this, there's something else. There's something else that you just don't see now.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And I mean, not only, when he would come out on the stage, he had the entire audience, as well as the entire band, in the palm of his hand the moment he stepped on that stage. And the thing is, he always would say that he was always completely honest, and that was a very important aspect of his career of no BS. I'm not trying to put on a show. This is the truth. This is the truth as I see it, as I experience it, and I want to take you with me on this journey. And so that was still when I think about that experience, and we had so much fun. I mean, the music was as good as anything I've ever done, with musicians who are as fantastic as any other musicians I've ever worked with in my life.
Yeah.
And all women. And, I really cherish that experience, and I'm still learning from it. Sometimes I'll think about, well, what would Maurice do, and it's just, just magical, just truly magical.
Now, was that the same big band? Matter of fact, I heard that band. Absolutely phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys also back up Nancy Wilson at one time?
Yes, and there's, I believe, a recording. There's an album out with Nancy Wilson. Yeah,
I saw that.
Yeah, and Nancy, I was talking about Sherrie Maricle, drummer. Sherrie and I and the pianist that we ended up discovering when the show went to Cleveland, her name is Jackie Warren. We have the 3D Jazz Trio, as you know, and I'm not the leader of it. Sherrie isn't we're like a co-led group, but Nancy, for her 80th birthday, requested us specifically to come and play at her birthday party, which was pretty epic. I mean, yeah, because she and Sherrie, as she loved Sherrie, she loved Diva. She was like, well, they're putting on this big birthday bash, and that was kind of crazy because looking out in the audience, there were some superstars. Dionne Warwick was there, and Stevie Wonder was there, and I mean, it was just kind of like, well, my God, but but it's such an honor to celebrate her, I mean, because she's. Nancy Wilson. Oh my God, no one else is Nancy Wilson. No
That's
one.
true. That's right. There's only one Nancy Wilson.
Yeah.
I know you've done a lot of traveling. You've been all over with playing for different people. Now, I know you may not be able to share all of this, but I would like for you to share some of what are some of the most funniest stories that you can share with us. Keyword, punchword, that you can share with us.
I know. Let me see. See, that's the thing. I'm so blessed, and I'm so grateful for what I get to do, to be a musician and to work with so many other great musicians that I get to work with. But the thing that's super fun, and I think, this is something when you are pursuing something that you're passionate about, you kind of end up attracting those who are of the similar kind of mindset, the similar kind of energy and personality, And so consequently, there's a lot of shenanigans that happen when we are on the road.
This is true.
And it's really, really fun. And it's basically, I mean, we laugh until it hurts, which is great. So let's see. What could I share that's okay and that won't get us all in trouble? Well, a few years ago, you're talking about the educational component of things. 3D had been a featured artist for the GEN conference, which is the Jazz Education Network conference that happens every year, and it moves around from city to city. And this particular year, it was in Nevada. It was in Nevada, in Reno, and and they have, live performances, and of course there's just like lots of clinics and classes and things that you can do throughout the day. And then there's the big exhibit hall, where there's all kinds of, there's artists, there's publishers, there's, instruments and instrument makers. I mean, pretty much sky's the limit. Anything that has to do with jazz in some kind of way is in this exhibit hall. And so I've always kind of wanted to, it's kind of fun when you can put on a disguise and and go do things, and nobody will know who you are, and so consequently, there was this one theater, I think it was in Delaware, the Delaware Theater Company, when we were doing the show with Maurice. This ties in, I promise. And they were having a props sale. The theater, because they put on a lot of productions. And so they had a bunch of wigs, so which is always really fun to put on wigs. And I remember I got this one wig that I thought, well, I'm going to surprise Maurice. This is going to be really funny, because I had this duet with him in the show where he was doing a tribute to Lena Horne, and so he and I would do this duet on Honeysuckle Rose together, and I would come down from my perch on the bandstand and come down a few steps, and he and I would do this duet. And so this one day, I think we had all been up late the night before, and so it just goofing off. And so I was maybe a little bit punchy, and also the filter wasn't completely in place. So I thought, I'm going to wear a wig for the show. That's a great idea. So I put this wig on, and the way the bandstand was set up is I was right next to the saxophone. So I was right next to the baritone sax player, a great player named Lauren Sevion. And she was like, do not look at me, do not, because she couldn't play. She was trying not to laugh so hard. So then, okay, come to the point where I'm doing the thing with Maurice, and I come down the steps, and he's introducing me, blah, 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 and he turns around to look at me, and he goes, did you get your hair done? It's hysterical. And of course the audience didn't know, and I'm like, oh yeah, Anyway, so this wig, I'm like, I gotta keep this wig because this is too fun. I got uses for this wig. So fast forward to this conference, and I convince our piano player, Jackie Warren. I'm like, I convince her to video me, like kind of being this character and just asking the most absurd things of people at different booths in the convention center. And it's really funny. There's some video of it. I can send you a link so you can see some of that later on there, Manny. And I would have to say it's probably some of my best work. But it's very funny because nobody knew it was me. Maybe, there might be some people now that know it was me, but they didn't initially. And every now and
caught them all by surprise.
Oh yeah. And the thing is, I think they all thought that I was, because Jackie, I was having to push her around in a wheelchair because the convention center was so huge, and she's got arthritis in her knee. So I think people thought that I was like her nurse or something, and so they wouldn't even look at me. They'd come right up to her because they recognized her had played the piano. Oh, it was a great trio, blah, blah, blah. But they didn't recognize me because I had completely different hair. I had different glasses, I was wearing crazy makeup. So every now and again that character does come out. I just, it's just got to be spur of the moment. It can't be too planned, because if it's too planned, it's not natural, but that kind of thing. Yeah.
I wish I could have seen you then.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I have to admit, I'm pretty proud of that accidental occurrence. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump in here real quick, if you don't mind, and just remind our listeners that you're listening to Speaking of Jazz with me, Manny Kellogg, and I'm your host. I come to you every week with a different artist, different musician, different vocalist. Name it, I have it. And you never know who's going to be on the show unless you tune in. And one thing I'd like to invite you to do, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please email at speakingofjazz.guess@gmail.com. That's speakingofjazz.guess@gmail.com. And I would love to have you. Now, again, I just got to dive back in here and let the lady of the hour continue. Amy, welcome back. Let's continue. I would like to, I got some stuff to ask you. What are you currently working on tours or anything right now? I know you just came off of a tour, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we just recently came back from the Gilmore International Piano Festival, which is in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And it's not just a jazz festival, it's a festival that's all about the piano. So there were incredible pianists from all around the world, but we were kind of part of the jazz component of that. So the Fred Hirsch Trio had also played, Emmett Cohen had played, and Diana Krall had played, and the 3D Jazz Trio played. And there were some, I think the festival maybe goes for at least 2 weeks, end of April, or maybe it's 3, end of April into the second week of May, I guess. And man, yeah, and so was over in Michigan for a bit. Coming up here at the end of June, the Rochester International Jazz Festival 3D is going to be featured there. We were scheduled there, in 2020, but like so many things, it just got canceled. But they're finally coming back online, and we're scheduled for this summer, so that's pretty great. And
Fantastic.
yeah. Well, and we have some other things that we're doing throughout there, but at the end of July, first part of August, we are going to be in the studio recording our next album, so that's pretty exciting too. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, while we're in that area right there,
mm-hmm.
Tell me about the 3D Jazz Trio. What's the names and the players? I'm sure they're all fantastic. And would you like to kind of share their names with us and how you guys got together and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, obviously I'm in it. I play the bass in it, and Sherrie Maricle is our drummer, and Jackie Warren is our pianist. And Sherry's kind of in the Philadelphia area. She splits her time between Philly and New York, and Jackie is in Cleveland, and we ended up meeting. It's still all signs will always point back to Maurice Hines, because it's really because of his show, and that's how we found each other, basically. Sherrie had inquired. The show was starting in the DC area, and so there were a few gals that are members of the Diva big band, full-time members, that were in DC, and Sherrie was needing to get a couple of local musicians, including the bass chair, and so she wanted to know if I could do it, so like, well, of course I can do it. And so then I was in the show and playing with Sherrie, and we were having a great time. And then when the show ended up going to the Cleveland Playhouse, that was another theater that some theaters could afford the A-team band, some theaters could only afford like key chairs. And so Sherrie, as the musical director, would have to find local musicians to fill those chairs. And so for this particular theater in Cleveland, it was the piano chair. We really needed a great pianist. And of course, everyone said, call Jackie Warren. And so we got Jackie Warren on it. And from note one, we just, we looked around at each other and we're like, oh my God, where have you all been? I know you. Okay, finally we found each other.
Right.
And so whenever we would have a show, we would always show up early before the show to warm up, but just to play together. And so about midway through our run in New York, we just decided we need to be a band. We need to keep doing this. We absolutely need to keep doing this. And so we did, and we recorded our first album, which was a broadcast from WVIA Studios in Scranton, Pennsylvania, for their homegrown concert series. And so we were doing this thing on the air, but they were recording it, and if we liked what we recorded, then we could release it as an album, and we did. And it was like, yeah, this is great, So that's the beginning of that. And since then, we've been, touring around and just having the best time ever making music together. And we did release 2 albums in 2020, which was very challenging because we couldn't tour with either one of them, for obvious reasons. But we released an album called I Love to See You Smile in I think it was in April of 2020, and then we did release a Christmas album.
Okay.
So we're due for the next one now. That hopefully when this one gets released, we'll be able to tour with it. So yeah.
Fantastic, Amy. Just fantastic. Again, I'm just sitting here swallowing all this up. It's just amazing that, I got to say, when I was in school, we had a female bass player, and this girl could play. From what, now that I really look back on it, I remember how well she was playing back then in high school. It was just unheard of. The instrument is usually the male instrument, like the violin is usually the female instrument, but now it's all different, because everybody's playing everything. If you can study it, you can play it if you want,
Yeah.
And this lady that I was in my high school jazz band, I can't remember her name, but I almost had a crush on her. She played so well.
Yeah, well,
not back then,
I wonder if she's still playing. That would be so cool if she were,
I don't remember. I know her brother was a singer, and he was a member of a well-known singing group back then called the Valentinos. So anyway, back to Amy.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you another question. What if, I know you're a mentor, I know you are a educator. What advice can you give to up-and-coming writers, musicians, arrangers, and bassists? What can you tell the up-and-comings to encourage them to keep going and doing what they're doing?
Well, the first thing is to not let anybody tell you that you can't. Regardless of your gender or your race or whatever it is, don't let anybody tell you that you can't. And that's something that I was really blessed with coming up in Idaho, in southern Idaho. The music program in the public schools was really absolutely one of the most fantastic in the country. We had orchestras, like an elementary honor orchestra. I remember auditioning for the honor orchestra when I was in 5th grade.
Really?
So, yeah. And so they had, so much support just for the arts. And I know that is not universal throughout our country or throughout our world, throughout our, wherever you live. And so I feel really fortunate to have had that experience, because at no time did I ever feel discouraged or that I couldn't or that I shouldn't try something, and I think that's the big thing. It's like, okay, if there's something that you really like, if there's an instrument you really want to try, even if it's something that, might be a little bit too difficult for you to handle, like the bass, for example, you kind of have to be a certain size, you have to be a certain age, certain size, to be able to handle the instrument physically. But,
okay.
But you can start on cello, or you can start on violin, and, until you kind of grow into yourself so that you can physically handle the instrument. Don't let that discourage you. Just, look at the long game, because there's lots of time. There's lots of time to learn something. And the other thing is to, it should, anything that's worth it is not always easy.
This is very true.
That can go for anything, not just music. It can go for relationships, all of these things. Anything that's worth it is not always going to be easy. Sometimes it's going to be really, really hard, and sometimes you're going to want to quit. Just don't, just don't do it. If you need to take a break, take a break. But if you, really seek to surround yourself with other folks who are like-minded, and as a musician especially, I remember being really lucky having classmates that wanted to play too. We didn't know anything, but that didn't mean that we shouldn't try, so that's the other thing. If if you can make a noise, make a noise, you know.
Yeah.
And but then also don't shirk your responsibility of, okay, I want to do this quote unquote correctly, and that means getting your technique together, not just so that you have, you know, good technique, but it's so that you can constantly be able to evolve and learn more language, you know, because that music is a language. It's an art form, but it's a language, and being able to communicate, you know, is paramount. And then to that end, listen. You know, if you're trying to learn a Thelonious Monk tune, for example, the sheet music is not the music. That's just like a map.
Right.
You know, so you could look at that and be like, okay, yeah, I can play this, but until you hear Thelonious Monk play it, that's where you get your concept. You got to get a good concept. You got to learn the language. So it's you know, very similar to you know, as a baby, your parents didn't hand you the dictionary and say, here, learn this so that you can talk to us.
Right.
You know, no, what you did is you spent time imitating them. They would say something to you. Eventually you would say it back. Eventually you would say it back correctly. So the same thing goes with music when you're trying to learn a genre, especially jazz, which is a very, very big genre. There's a lot of concept. There's a lot of language. And the only way you can learn it is to listen. Now, ideally, you like what you're listening to. So, you know, for me, I listen to jazz because I like to listen to it. It was exciting music to listen to. If you like pop music, you listen to that, then you try to figure out that, you know.
Yeah.
Try to copy what you're hearing, but you have to listen to it. You know, listening is the most important thing that you can do to develop.
To this very day, I'm always glad to brag about my mentor and who I still listen to, who is Harold Jones, Tony Bennett's drummer.
All right, yeah.
Jeff Hamilton. These are people that I listen to this very day, and I'm celebrating my 61st year behind the drum set this year.
All right,
and I'm still listening. You know?
Yeah. That's you have to. You know, like like I said with the bass, I'm never gonna master it. You're never gonna master the drums, but you keep adding to it. You keep.
That's right.
You keep you know, developing. You keep learning more language so that you can communicate more effectively and effortlessly. You know, I mean, I think that's why you spend the time doing your rudiments or practicing your scales and trying to do your technique, get the technique so that you can communicate and really be in the moment. You know, that's the thing about jazz, especially because it's such an improvisatory music, that you need to be able to communicate in the moment, you know, to go off on a tangent if you're following somebody off on a tangent, you know, not lose your place, you know. I had this great professor when I was in college named Dan Buckfitch. He's an amazing drummer and an amazing composer. And I remember in combo class, man, he would rant at us. He would say, listen louder than you play. And we'd be like, I don't know what you mean. You know, of course, now I totally know what he means. And it's from, you know, knowing your instrument, knowing your part, whatever it is your role in the band is, knowing it so well that you are not entirely focused on yourself or entirely focused on the music stand, but that not that you're just kind of playing things on autopilot. It's not that at all. It's that you're playing and you're completely engaged and you can be 100% in the moment and having that conversation, you know. So that's another. Listen louder than you play. Get your nose out of the music stand. Memorize as quickly as you can. You know. Yeah.
Another quick question for you, and we're kind of winding up here. I hate to cut you loose and say we've run out of time, but anyway, how long? You know, I'm just curious myself. Amy, how long have you been playing your instrument?
Well, let's see. I started on violin when I was 9, and I started playing bass when I was about 13, and yeah, so I guess coming up on 36, 37 years playing bass,
Yeah, yeah.
a long time. Yeah, it's funny doing the math and looking at those numbers, because I'm like, I don't even feel like I'm mature enough to really have a checkbook, but here I am balancing it. Okay, so you know what I mean? I'm like, really? I'm that old? I pay a mortgage? What? Somebody thought that I was responsible enough for that? I guess so. Yeah.
I just have to keep saying, I've seen you play, and I just think that not only are you a phenomenal player, but you're fantastic to watch, and the energy and the joy that you send out to the rest of your colleagues on the stage. I mean, it just comes out. It hits you in the audience. It hits me right in the chest. And I like stuff like that, because you can be the best player, the best vocalist, the best drummer, the best whatever around. And if you have an ugly personality, that makes you an ugly person.
Yeah.
It overrides how well you can play.
Mm-hmm.
And the radiance that you give, and the excitement that you give, and the love that you give on stage to everyone else is absolutely fantastic. And, I applaud you for that. Next time you're playing somewhere, I'm going to be sitting in the front row. Maybe one day we get a chance to swing together. I love the quarter note swing myself.
Me too. Oh, I appreciate you saying that, Manny, because there's a lot I can speak to about that, and one of the things that I have in my career, I have always endeavored to be the person that you call because you want me specifically, not because you need a warm body on the bass, but because you want me specifically and what I bring musically,
right.
And professionally, etc. All of those things. So, but one of those things that's really important to me is that when I get on the bandstand, whether or not it's with people I'm familiar with or with people who are brand new to me, it's always my intention to elevate. It's always my intention to be supportive musically, but as well as personally, so that everyone around me can play the best they possibly can. I don't want to be the one that brings anybody down. I want it to be the opposite. I want it to be,
yes,
where the joy is infectious, because it's so fun to play music, and it's so fun to play music with other great musicians, and it's so fun to play for an audience that wants to be there to hear the music,
Right.
And there's something that, getting back to Maurice Hines, that he was a great, and still is, a great musician, great dancer, great performer, but he also recognized that, doing what he did, you had to present in a certain kind of way. And even the best musicians who are coming to listen to great musicians, the first thing that they do is they listen with their eyes. We all do.
That's right.
There's no shame in that, and there's no shame in admitting that, And when you see that people are having fun, then you have fun too, Right. I mean, it's very similar to what I was talking about with your parents, mimicking your parents. It's like, oh, well, they're having fun. I'm having fun watching them have fun, and then it creates this wonderful energy that just feeds on itself, and everybody has an even better and more elevated experience, And to me, it's just as important to have that stage presence where it's inclusive, where it really brings in your collaborators on the bandstand, but then it also includes folks that you're performing for, playing with, that are there to support you. It's very important,
Fantastic. I mean, I'm still just swallowing everything up here. I got one last question for you, Amy.
Mm-hmm.
Put your seatbelt on.
Uh-oh. Do I need to put my virtual background back on?
Well, just what I should say, just hang on. It's not difficult. It's a question that I ask every week, every episode.
Okay.
What is jazz to Amy?
Oh, wow. Well, it's everything. it's present in all aspects of life, of my life, certainly, and not just the music aspect, but the ability to be flexible in a situation, the ability to communicate well and effectively with others, the ability to create art, but also create art with others and have others support you in your attempt at creating art.
Okay.
The sense of community, the jazz community it's my family. It's my family of choice, certainly, and I have a very diverse and very rich and very loving family, and I'm grateful for that, I don't know. It's everything, Manny.
Well, I'm going to say, there you have it. I mean, you couldn't have heard it better from the fantastic Miss Amy Shook. And again, I want to just remind the listeners, you're listening to Speaking of Jazz with me, Manny Kellogg. I'm your host, and every week I'm coming to you different, with someone different every week. And as I said earlier in the show, you'll never know who's going to be on the show unless you tune in.
That's right.
So you got to come in and dig us and check us out, and if you'd like to be a guest on the show, email us at speakingofjazz.guests@gmail.com. On that note, Amy, would you like to leave an email or some way that people can contact you?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to admit I'm really terrible about social media. I try, and I post, my gigs on my Facebook page, which if you search for Bass Amy Shook, I think you'll find me there, as well as 3D Jazz Trio. If you search for 3D or 3 Divas Jazz Trio, you'll find our Facebook page there. And there's an Instagram account for that too. I mostly Sherrie handles that. She's better at that than I am. But you certainly can find me at my website, which is just amyshook.com. You can email me at amy@amyshook.com. That's easy. I'm all over the place. Send me a message.
Well, fantastic. Again, I thank you so much for being my guest this week on today's show. And I'm just honored to have been able to catch up with you, because I know you're a very busy lady. And please, the next time you're performing someplace, send me an email or just call me. Now you know how to reach me.
All right, I'll call you.
And I want to be in the front row, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Oh man, you would have liked it this past weekend. I wish I'd known. All right. Well, I'll hit you again.
I'm gonna be looking forward to it. And I need to thank some people. I'd like to thank Daryl Craig Harris, Nigel J. Farmer, and Jazz Tribe News for making this show possible. And again, you're listening to Speaking of Jazz with me, Manny Kellogg. I'm your host. And as I always say, keep swinging and God bless. Until we meet again, Miss Amy.
All right. Swinging. Thank you, Manny. You too. I'll catch you soon.
It's been a pleasure. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you for keeping jazz alive. Don't forget to follow us on our social media channels. All the links are in the podcast description.